This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. And I wanted to try this out. I'm trying out a new screen here. So I'll jump straight into the news from solar. And for those of you who are new there, I'm Jay Warmke. So let's see how this is working. And I guess I'll look at who I can see there. Chris, are you able to see the slides and everything since this is all brand new? Okay, great. Okay, so in the news of solar, California, I thought what I'd do is recap some of the legislation that's just happened because there's been a lot of it here in the last few weeks. So California has just approved a law that calls for instant solar permitting, and for counties where there are more than 150,000 people within that county. And what this is going to do is there are programs out there. Solar App Plus is the one that's being promoted across the country. It uses artificial intelligence. So if a designer goes in, registers with the system, they pay a small fee for the system to evaluate their design. And if it meets all of the criteria that's built into the program, then they get an instant permit for the installation of solar at that site. Currently, a lot of cities may take weeks and weeks to give you a permit to do a residential install. So, so this is a new process that's out there, gives instant permitting, and now California just passed legislation essentially mandating this instant permitting in all larger counties. They've also extended for 2 years property tax exemption on the installation of solar in homes and businesses. So if you install a solar array at a location, then you will not be assessed an additional property tax for the increased value of the solar that the solar has done for your property. Now, not surprisingly or surprisingly, Missouri this same week the Supreme Court of Missouri has ruled that a similar law that went into effect in 2013 is unconstitutional. So California is doing it, Missouri is prohibiting it. So, so goes the red state, blue state. Also in California, the net metering 3.0, they're expected to give a ruling on that the end of September, so the end of this month. Now, we've touched on this in past meetings, but net metering 2.0, 1.0, 3.0, basically in California, whenever they hit a 5% level of penetration, market penetration in solar, they revise the rules around net metering. And so they're doing 3.0, and what they've proposed is a dramatic decrease in the amount of money that they would pay for net metering. The average credit currently is around 30 cents per kilowatt hour. They're going to reduce that to about 5 or 6 cents a kilowatt hour. And the monthly fees, they're going to add an $8 per kilowatt fee for solar arrays. That's your grid access fee. So they're saying the average would be $72 a month. That would be for a 7 kW system. And then they're also not allowing any monthly carryovers. So basically the true up period will be reduced to a monthly. So if you do over generate in 1 month, it will not carry forward. So a lot of folks protesting this in California. Looks like it's really going to trash the whole idea of net metering, which seems weird since the rest of the state is trying to promote solar tremendously. Now, also in California, they just passed a law that mandates that any utility with more than 100,000 customers must accommodate low-income people, try and get them into solar, primarily through community solar. Again, this is a subject we've touched on before in these meetings. Community solar is where a large solar array is installed. It might be owned by the utility. It might be owned by an investor and being sold back through the utility. But then people can purchase either the power from the array or panels themselves. There are two different ways that they do this. and then it's allocated to their bill. So community solar getting a big push in California. The University of Virginia has just set up some sample ordinances or guidelines that they're wanting to propagate throughout the nation to authorities having jurisdiction about decommissioning of utility scale and commercial scale systems primarily. What they're trying to do is anticipate that at the end of the useful life of these systems, that we will then have a process where the developer pays for the decommissioning of the system. So the tearing down and disposing of everything. Something that was, of course, never done in the fossil fuel world. So they're trying to be proactive here. Massive,
Jay,
yeah.
just before we go too far from that, in the fossil fuel world, I think they do have to do that. They account for it up front when they do their construction stuff, just to be on a fair and even keel with everybody.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll.
So now I should let you guys know that I spent 10 years in fossil fuels maintaining the Rockies Express pipeline. Now I am definitely a solar advocate, but I do have a lot of, and I was into the budgeting. Now, yes, we did plan for what we called tear down. There was another term for it in the budgeting process. Now, did that money always go to that? Hardly ever. So there you go. But it is budgeted.
Yeah, and I also know at least an example of the natural gas wells in North Dakota. I remember not too long ago, the US government had to budget more than $1 billion to locate and cap abandoned gas wells, because while there was legislation that said that they had to post a bond for cleanup, the Congress had reduced the amount of that bond to $100 per well. So they simply abandoned them. So anyway,
we have the same issue in Kentucky with abandoned oil and gas stuff too, but that's mainly on the producers, not on the utilities.
Yeah.
It's individuals who disappear. Yeah.
I agree. And there's no assurance that the solar industry will be any better in doing this. You know, I mean, who knows? Yeah. I mean, you can declare bankruptcy and run away from pretty much anything. So we'll see. Hopefully
easier to tear down a solar field than it is to dig up miles of pipeline and recycle it. There's so much outdated pipeline in our, in the soil. It's crazy.
Yep. So you're certainly right there. Okay, so Massachusetts doubled the size of residential systems that qualify for net metering. So that's now up to 25 kW. So I guess before it was 12.5 kW. And also as part of this new legislation, they are promoting pollinator-friendly commercial systems. So we'll see that's, I mean, it's nice. It's part of the whole, I think the solar industry more so than fossil fuels. So I'll give a nod to Don, are subject to criticism about hypocrisy. This industry is supposed to be green. This industry is so if we do things like disrupt native habitat or don't clean up our mess, we're going to be perhaps subject to that criticism a little more. At least they'll sting a little bit more than Exxon, who doesn't care. So, or First Energy. We'll name some evil companies here. In Minnesota, there's a recent legislation or settlement. It's a court settlement. There was a log jam in the interconnection process. Xcel Energy, which is a large utility in Minnesota. We're getting so behind in interconnection applications that actually the Minnesota Solar Energy Association did a study and found that at the current rate of approving applications for interconnection, it would take 260 years for Xcel to clear through the current backlog of applications. So they had maintained that they had to do one at a time. So anyway, in this court settlement, they're agreeing that they can do multiples at the same time, and in fact do batch approvals if there's no rational reason why the grid can't accommodate these systems. And another problem that was happening in Minnesota, I think this happens across the country, is that there's this provision that if the grid does need to be upgraded to accommodate a distributed energy system, then the causer pays. So the causer, so if I apply to install a system onto the grid, and the grid says, listen, we got to upgrade the transformers, we got to upgrade the substation, for instance, then me as the developer, will have to pay 100% of the cost of that upgrade. So what was happening is people were applying, getting then told that you have, X number of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in grid upgrade fees. They canceled the project, and there were whole sections of the grid that simply were not developable as part of renewable energy. So now what they've agreed to do is charge a set fee for every application, and then put that money into a pool that will then pay for the upgrades of the utility. So to accommodate the interconnection of systems. And then, of course, the big daddy of them all was the Inflation Reduction Act that just recently passed at the national level. And we did a lot on this last week, but essentially the main points, at least from my perspective, increases the investment tax credit to 30% and carries that forward for a period of 10 years. So that gives a lot of stability in people's planning. That's a good thing. The electric vehicle tax credits that are incorporated in this, although currently there are no electric vehicles that qualify, but I'm sure that's going to change because it requires domestic batteries and domestic assembly. And then there's also additional credits for low-income installations or areas and brownfields. And there's also a credit for places that have been traditionally fossil fuel dependent. Like, I think this is the Joe Manchin, West Virginia credit. So I think that's it there from Solar News. So any comments?
Jay, any thoughts? I got a question for you. Any thoughts on what you've seen from California lately with the push to not have people? I mean, that one thing, on the one hand, they've got the cars that are required by 35, but the push to not have people charged during certain periods. Do you see them clearing that with more power or anything? I'm just curious, your general opinion.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that sort of goes in line with what we're going to discuss a little bit. What you're saying is because they're moving everything to electric vehicles, now we're going to be having an issue with the
grid stability, I guess.
Yeah, grid stability and peak load demand and all of that kind of thing. Whoops. There we go. I'm still playing with my system here. Yeah, I haven't seen anything specifically as far as prohibiting it. Of course, they've been promoting
it, I guess. Yeah.
Well, they've been promoting it through time of use pricing, which would be a big incentive for folks to go ahead and charge their car when the price of electricity is low. Some people that wouldn't matter. So I guess there's carrot and stick issues there. I don't know, if I had an electric car and I'd charge it at my place of employment, just like stealing paper clips or whatever, so
Really?
and then using the battery when I got home. So that's one of the perks.
Double take.
Going to an office. So no, I guess I'm wondering, anybody have any insight on where we're going with all of that? With charging, because I think you're right, Don, there is a huge stability issue, a huge grid issue as we begin to electrify, especially the transportation industry. The grid's not designed to handle that just yet. I think that's part of the motivation behind this Inflation Reduction Act, is they're trying to supercharge the development of solar resources on the one hand. Also, the infrastructure bill had huge amounts of money allocated to transmission grid upgrade. So that should be starting to get out there, you know, at this stage as well. So if I'm, you know, looking at it from the outside, it seems like the Biden administration is saying we need to make a major investment in the utility grid infrastructure from pretty much all levels, from the homeowners investing in their own systems, and then also the transportation, the transmission industry. The weak link in that armor is going to be the distribution grid. What are the local utilities going to do? And I'm not quite sure there. I think some will do it well, some will do it poorly. So
Jay, they had on PBS News last night, national news, international news, they had somebody talking about the charging capacity for the California grid. He thought it would be okay. It wouldn't, they could survive without extensive upgrades to the grid until maybe 2030 if they implemented, you know, time of day optimal charging for electric vehicles.
Yeah, I saw an estimate that they thought that by 2040, the grid would, or 2045 it might be, but it was like they needed 68% increase in capacity. So a lot of that may be at the back end of that, you know, in those last 15 years, especially as we see the electric vehicles being adopted, because that was the law that was just passed, says all vehicles registered, all new vehicles have to be electric by 2035 in California. So essentially they're phasing out gasoline powered engines, which it's going to be a long process, but you know, and also tax the grid substantially. Devanand, you had brought up something about a new product. You said the PV thermal thing. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Okay, that's okay, I was dealing with a company called ELM. And this is what the information has been sent to me. ELM companies, they have a partnership agreement with this company called Naked Energies. And this Naked Energy is the developer of, they say, the world's highest energy density solar technology. They say it's cutting edge stuff, thermal and photovoltaic thermal. It's called PVT for short, PVT products. And what I sent you there was actually the link, the website link to the company called Naked Energy, which has some more information on the on that particular product they plan on developing.
Okay, and you were saying that this is a combination of solar electric, photovoltaic, and solar thermal.
So it's like simply put, it's like from what I got, it's like think of it like a PV panel, a solar module, and that is immersed in a container system with liquids, just like the evacuated tubes you get on a solar thermal. So the idea is that the water cools the PV modules during daytime. That leads to increase on efficiency on the PV module part, higher energy output. At the same time, you're generating all this heat byproduct from the sun onto the plate itself. The water picks up the heat, and they use that as just like a standard solar water heater system as a byproduct of it as well. So as I say, it's kind of combining both. This is called PVT. I first heard about it.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting, we talked about that in class from time to time, where the concept seems sound, you know, where you're going to use water or some other coolant agent to cool your panels to get a better production from your electric. But even if a panel is 80% efficient in converting to electricity, a significant portion of that are 20% efficient, then a significant portion of the 80% is lost heat. So if you can absorb that heat, then that's another thing. Although having liquids and electricity, you know, running together could present a few problems. But, you know, they've got photovoltaics now where solar is being installed on top of ponds. You know, so I guess, you obviously it's going to be a niche market there. And I suspect that if solar continues to get cheaper and cheaper, the advantage of solar thermal heating will be less and less, because you may as well just install more solar and use electric hot water heater, or other heating, geothermal or whatever. So it's worth looking at. That sounds interesting. Anybody else have anything else they want to bring up for the good of the cause before we jump into a quick discussion?
Yeah, does anyone in this group have any experience with low power residential wind turbines?
I do a little bit. I mean, I've installed a tower at Blue Rock Station, and put on a little 400-watt wind turbine.
Did you get it at Amazon?
Oh, where did I get that? I think I got it at Missouri Wind and Solar long ago. It's just a little, I built the tower myself. I just used Schedule 40 pipe and built the guy wires and all of that just from local materials.
How tall is the tower?
It's 30 feet, 30 foot tall. It's a tilt up design. So the thing about wind is you're going to need to design it so you can bring that thing down at least once a year, just to do a little bit of maintenance on it.
Oh, like I've noticed that for 400 watts small turbine, Amazon is a few $100s. But if you go to a mainstream solar distributor like Northern Arizona Wind and Solar, they have $1,200 ones, and they're maybe 250 watts. So I wonder if it's a matter of you get what you pay for, or what with the cheaper ones.
Yeah, probably, but just because you're paying more doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get something better either.
Yeah.
They have a lot of those little 12-volt cheapy ones that are designed for marine environments, and RV environments. I think those are pretty stable. They generate a DC current. So if you want to play around with it, why not get a cheap one, install it on your tower, and then if you have issues with it, you've only invested a couple of $100.
Yeah.
I will say
Is yours a cylindrical turbine or a 3-blade one?
It's the horizontal axis 3-blade.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I know you're talking about a vertical axis, one of those that turns like that. Yeah, those are not as efficient, just by design, because half of the turbine's going to be turning into the wind while the other half is being pushed by the wind. So they're always going to be resisting. So horizontal axis, they look cool and whatever, but they're not all that. Horizontal axis are more efficient and usually cheaper.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I was just going to reinforce that. That's what our community, our off-grid community has found. The problem is 400 watts isn't the same for every, turbine. There's no standards for at which point the turbine will produce 400 watts, how much wind you need, etc. Startup wind and so forth. Ultimately, we have found that they're huge maintenance headaches. They don't perform as advertised, and that's why most of us stick with solar.
Yeah. I've taught a solar class or a wind class here at Zane State a number of years, and yeah, you're absolutely right. There is, although AWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, has come up with some certification guidelines to try and set a apples to apples comparison for wind turbines, small wind turbines. But what you're really looking at is annual output, at various wind speeds. So you don't want to say 400 watts, like Gabriel said, that's just the number they're throwing out there. Because, excuse me, one manufacturer might say 400 watts at, 50 miles per hour, and the other is 400 watts at 10 miles per hour wind speeds. Well, that's a very different situation. So because there is no standards like in solar where you have STC, standard test conditions, and everybody compares it the same thing. So you're going to have to, and the other issue with wind is there's no good reliable data as to how much wind you have at your site. There's no really good wind mapping. And of course, the higher you go up, the more wind there is. So I hear a lot of times people say, yeah, it's really windy at my house, but what does that really mean? It's windy at my house too, but the trees tend to block it anywhere I want to install the tower. So ours is just for show, we were doing a lab where we had to lower and raise the wind tower, for the class. So that was its primary purpose. But I'm with you, Gabriel. I would much rather install a bigger solar array. But Eugene, if you just want to play with wind, if you're just playing around,
Janine Sands once won on her barn, just mainly for show.
Yeah.
So
well,
I'm
putting a wind turbine on a barn is not a good idea either. You're going to get vibrational issues where the harmonics can begin to actually shake the building apart if you get a big enough wind turbine. For the wind turbine to function, it really should be 300 feet away and 30 feet above any structure. Otherwise, you get turbulence issues, and you get into a wind shadow. So a lot of people have that idea. I'm going to install it on top of the building, on top of a barn, or from a horizontal axis or whatever, and you're going to find it doesn't work very well. In fact, just outside the window here where I'm sitting, Zane State has a vertical axis wind turbine that they mounted out in front of the building. Well, of course, only on rare occasion does it turn because the building is shadowing it. But it vibrated so much, it tore up all the concrete where it's mounted. And then I just noticed just a couple of weeks ago, one of the vertical blades, and this is a several $100,000 wind turbine for sure, it crumpled. I mean, the blade itself twisted and broke. Apparently, the vibrations got it, the harmonics got it so out of kilter that it actually collapsed the vertical blade. So now it's of no use at all. Now it just sits there, and they'll never fix it. It'll just be there as a testimony to why solar is so much better than wind, so.
Jay, you also have noise. I agree with the building issues, and you also have noise and bird strike issues as well.
Yeah. Yep.
There was a quote from Mick Sagrillo that I often respond to people who ask me about wind turbines. And it was that a small wind turbine will take as much wear in 4 months as a car will in 100,000 miles.
Yeah. It's a pretty harsh environment. So, I think there's a reason at a utility scale, with one of those big $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, however much they are, it makes sense. There is the economy of scale there where large utility scale wind makes sense because they've got maintenance guys and it's a big thing. But at the local level, I mean, with the costs as they are, solar's the way to go. And again, unless you're just playing, unless you're just wanting to play around with it. And it's like people who own boats, you'll never make a financial argument for owning a boat. But, if you like wind and you want to play around with it, go for it. Okay. Anybody else have anything to add on that or anything else? Let me just jump in. I don't have a lot on this, but I wanted to try and push some discussion on it where Sonova just announced they've applied to the California Public Utilities Commission to become a micro utility provider. And we have talked about, I've talked about in class, but we've talked about in these discussions, how the utility, today's utility is not going to look like tomorrow's utility. Tomorrow's utility is going to be something very, very different. And I think this is a first step towards that evolution of how utilities are going to be disrupted and broken apart. But Sunnova is a installation product manufacturer, and now they're getting into the utility business. And what they're looking for is to be approved to essentially create microgrids within new constructed communities in California. So they're envisioning that as a development comes online, then Sunnova would be the installer of, and would own all of the equipment, the generation facilities, the distribution facilities within that development, would essentially become a mini utility for that subdivision or development. And I'm assuming, although the articles didn't say this, that they'd also try to be the installer for the various homes that are going into that development. And I'm just wondering if people have any thoughts on, how if they're seeing anything locally, or how they see this trend manifesting itself in the coming years as we see the utilities broken up.
We got to
Jay,
keep
we
it from
actually
being
know some of them.
monopolized.
Go ahead.
Whoops.
Go ahead, Jason. We actually know Sunnova
Yeah.
pretty well. So I spoke with a couple folks over there. Really kind of interesting company, really great company. I think this is, the first of what will ultimately be many such actions. We've discussed it. We've kind of nibbled around the edges before about this in this setting. But the current way of generating and distributing energy is like the most kind of ridiculously broken and archaic way of doing it. And so I think this is just like the first little example of what we'll see kind of across the country, across the world, because this just makes so much sense to do. And their kind of barriers to entry are so much lower because of the nature that we kind of discussed with with solar versus wind just now. I mean, their sweet spot right now is residential solar. They're standing up a C&I, commercial and industrial division, and then they're making this play for essentially kind of utility status to generate their own electricity. So I think this is like proof in what some of the things that we've discussed on this call that it's actually playing out in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Jason, you had something to add there?
I like it. I think it's a great move forward, because honestly, all you need is a community that's willing to back it, right? And then of course the feds have to back it as well, like all things, but we just have to make sure that this opens up a lot of room for monopolization. The people that are going to start hurting from this is going to be oil and gas, and they're going to try and find a new niche. It's already starting. I was ahead of some electric generation projects when I left that kind of petered out, and they're still tossing them up in the air, but they were turbine generation. They know it's coming. So we just got to watch and make sure that we don't have the same people right now that are giving us issues that we're trying to correct right in our own communities, right where we don't want them.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's interesting. They're focusing on new construction at the moment, not on existing. But we've talked a little bit about how like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Walmart have all applied to become utilities. Basically the Silicon Valley industry is moving into the utility market. I wonder how this impacts when, getting access to the local distribution network is fairly straightforward when you have a monopolistic ownership model where, for instance, the AEPs and First Energies of the world are required at some point to lease a portion of their distribution to a company like Apple or Facebook or whoever. But then you start throwing in a lot of these little micro utilities into that mix where now I want to get to Tony's home, but he lives in a subdivision, and at the edge of the subdivision, Synovus, owns it within the subdivision, but then AEP owns it from there to the substation, and then who knows who owns it from somewhere else to somewhere else, from my facility. So I don't quite know. I'm sure somebody's out there doing it. They do this with the internet.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, you've made this comparison before to telecommunications. That's a great lesson to kind of draw from.
Yeah.
Like to calm. It's been great for my mental health to go read about like the early grid and what just an absolute catastrophic, anarchy shit show that was in the early days. And then also you read about telecommunications or internet, and it's the exact same thing. Like who owns what lines? How's this work? How are we doing this? How are we getting data to somebody's house? Router inside their house? Is it through telephone lines? It's owned by Bell. How do we do this? So I think there's a lot of parallels between the two.
Everything's trial and error. Don't let anybody tell you any different.
Which is always good when, especially in the fossil fuel or in the electricity industry where things blow up, so we'll just keep trying it until it explodes. So
Jay, would that be something like a virtual power plant situation you're talking about?
It's a little bit different than you said, virtual power plant. Because it's different than that, because they're talking about owning a real power plant, probably solar, but only in a very limited geography. So yeah, when you start throwing in virtual power plants into the mix, and virtual utilities and mini utilities, and then of course regulated, and we ran through this with the telecom world. For a while there was the determination of, is this on the regulated side or on the deregulated side, and which laws apply, and we're going to get into this in the electrical world as well. Is it a regulated thing that we're doing here? Is a virtual power plant something that has to be regulated if it doesn't exist? Who would have authority over a combination of all the electric vehicles that are out there in a parking lot that I'm tapping into? Obviously, if it's a coal power plant, then somebody has regulatory authority. But if I've got a moving target of a virtual power plant, at some point you just throw up your hands and go, you know what, it's just all deregulated. There's just nothing we can do about it. And then I don't know where we go, because in the world of telecommunications, we kind of went wireless, with the actual voice issues and the data issues, even, except for the backbone, and boy, it'll be interesting. It'll be fun. Somebody's going to make a lot of money. It's not going to be me. But so any other perspectives on it, that we're heading into chaos?
Before you go, Tony, I could call you after the session done. All right.
Pardon? Yep. So even down in Trinidad, where you are you in Trinidad or Tobago, Devanan? Or is
Trinidad.
Trinidad, yeah. So you've still not even allowed to connect to the grid with solar, right? For your systems or for net metering?
It's just a craziness in Trinidad going on right now. They're hinting that it will happen soon, right? Okay. However, there's no interconnection agreement that has come out. There's no PPA in terms of what is happening. There are some large government funded projects. There's one that is done by the BP Amuco through Lighthouse of a 123 megawatt plant project that was supposed to start it some time ago, but for some reason we don't know what is the delay. They recently had a 1 megawatt system at our airport facilities, which were all grid connected. The airport one was supposed to be self-consumption. The larger project, of course, was a full substation connection feeding into the grid. And that is being funded by the government. Well, not actually, sorry. It is funded and financed by BP Shalamuku, with the idea after this plant goes up, they would take operation of the plant and just sell back the electricity to the grid or utility at some rate. Of course, I heard that is still debating between the two parties. Can seems to have some kind of agreement taking place there. When it comes to residential grid tie, we're still waiting. Hopefully by next year, they might pass some laws or give us the okay, but we're still waiting to see even what the others say, what is interconnection requirements and these things are about. I could make an application to do one installation in Trinidad grid tie, but I would have to make a special, what they call application for a license. And of course, since there's no tariff rate, something being set, it will all be based on self-consumption.
Oh, okay. So that you're giving a good argument for deregulation of the industry, because by the time they make a decision, the technology has changed and, you know, everybody's moved on. So, yep. All right. Okay. Anybody have anything else for the good of the cause? Let's see. Have you discussed storage technologies development recently during the weekly? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll maybe look into storage for the next call to see if there's anything new in the world of storage. So any other suggestions for future calls, topics you want to explore?
Hey, Jay, I'm curious to know your take on Sun Hydrogen Inc. I've been following them for a little while. I don't know what to take of it. It's solar hydrogen generation using water, and that's wastewater as well. So they're testing right now. So I'd like to know your take next meeting.
Okay.
If you would, please.
Yeah, I'll leave you with my catchphrase on hydrogen is it is the technology of the future and always will be. So that's kind of my take on hydrogen. But yeah, rather than going to
agree.
Yep, I'll rant and rave against hydrogen next call. So
Jay,
yeah, Bill.
one of the things that I think would be interesting to hear about, and I know you talked about photovoltaics, and there's a very large portion of our population that lives within 50 miles of the coast. I'd be real interested in hearing what's going on with corrosion, and maybe Devanand has thoughts about how you prevent corrosion from struts and spars and other parts of the system. I mean, do you go to fiberglass? Do you what do you do?
Stainless steel and money.
Yeah, well, yeah, but
okay.
Well, basically, a lot of our installation takes place on the coastlines, and like even in Tobago. So really and truly, only speaking from a personal perspective, I try to look at PV modules with a good CMIS rating. When it comes to the electrical termination, we look at some sealants. And of course, the switchgear boxes, we always try to look at manufacturers to let them know, these things are exposed to the environment. Salt is always an issue if you could kind of put some kind of protective coating on the material. But it is a lot of installation takes place, and when they go out on the site after even a couple of months, we can see the really effects of salt water having all these things. So it is something kind of new to a lot of us in Trinidad as well.
Okay. Well, I'll look into it, but I do know that there are some modules and product out there that claim to be saltwater resistant, so we can look at that. It seems to me there's even a corrosion standard, so you might look at getting products that meet that corrosion standard. But I'll look into that for the next call about corrosion, and we can talk a little bit about galvanic corrosion. Not just environmental, but mixing of metals, in and how that can cause degrading of the product. So we'll just talk a little bit about corrosion next time. All right. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week. Same place, same time. All right.
thanks,
Take
Jay.
care. Bye-bye.
Very nice to meet you.